الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله تبارك وتعالى عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا أما بعد. We are continuing the discussion on the errors and the major blunders that were made by previous nations. Most notably, Bani Israel, who had a very strong tradition and legacy of prophets, ﷺ, divine scriptures, pious people, and all kinds of signs and miracles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given them. Yet they continued to challenge those words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those people that were sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those signs that were given to them as proofs of the truthfulness of those scriptures and those Anbiya alayhi salatu wassalam. Most of this was related to Musa alayhi salam and his teachings, his interactions with his nation. Now the discussion shifts to mistakes that they made in relation to other Anbiya alayhimus salam as well. There has been some general reference, such as killing the prophets alayhimus salam. But now specifically, the way they dealt with the teachings of one of the great prophets of Allah, Sulayman alayhi salatu wassalam, the son of Dawood alayhi salam. Dawood alayhi salam had received the Zabur. He was a prophet and also a ruler, also a judge. Allah Azza wa Jalla had given him many miracles, many powers, and Sulayman alayhi salam was his heir. He was the one who carried on that legacy. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him control over the winds, control over jinns, and the ability to speak with all the different creatures. During that time, in the region that is now Iraq, in the city of Babylon, there was a great trend towards magic, magicians, sorcerers, shamans. And these people had built not only a reputation for themselves, but in the minds and hearts of their communities, they had built a reverence for themselves. They were given a respect. In fact, they were treated like holy men or like saints. People became very influenced by magic and sorcery, started chasing after it. And when they saw the feats that magicians were achieving, many of them started believing that there is no difference between these people and prophets. In fact, these people are also just like prophets. Or maybe they are prophets. Or maybe what the prophets are doing is the same as what these magicians are doing. So there was a great confusion created in the communities and society. The thing that made it even more complicated was that those who knew scripture, who knew the prophets and were their followers, those who claimed to be believers, they also fell into this trap. They became enchanted by the powers of sorcery, and they started chasing after sorcerers themselves. In fact, they went to such an extent where they started learning sorcery, witchcraft, magic, as if it was some kind of a sacred and holy practice. This is where the Quran picks up the story. From verse 102, وَاتَّبَعُوا مَا تَتْلُو الشَّيَاطِينُ عَلَى مُلْكِ سُلَيْمَانَ. They started following, chasing after what the shayateen used to recite during the reign, during the kingdom of Sulayman alayhi salam. Now why are the shayateen being mentioned here? We will speak about the nature of sorcery and magic in just a little while. But it is brought here to show the direct contrast and contradiction between what they were supposed to follow and what they did follow. They were supposed to follow what the Anbiya alayhi salam were reciting to them as revealed by Allah. Instead, they were reciting what the shayateen were whispering to and reciting to these magicians. Even though the paths are clearly different, the sources of those paths are clearly different, the destinations of both paths are very different, but they chose that which they felt A, had an immediate effect, and secondly, it was something that could be obtained through human means and used to carry out whatever agendas, whatever missions, goals, objectives they had. And the goals and objectives that they had at that time were not too different from the goals and objectives that people have today when they pursue these types of things. To make matters worse, these people of Bani Israel started claiming that we're not doing anything different from Sulayman alayhi salam himself. In fact, he is the head sorcerer. He is the greatest magician. Don't you see what he can do with the winds? How he controls animals? How he controls the jinns? We also deal with jinns. We do the same thing. So they had no shame or hesitation in attributing magic to pure and innocent slaves of Allah, the Prophets ﷺ. In these people's creed, in fact, there is no sanctity for the Prophets. They have not spared any Prophet. They have attributed vice and sin, error, and all kinds of misdeeds to the Prophets ﷺ. In fact, it was because of them and their fabricated stories that these stories even made their way into Muslim society and Muslim communities. The sources of those stories are from Bani Israel themselves. These riwayat, which we call Israeli riwayat. Israeli riwayat, in English we call them Judaica. These are those narrations that reached the Muslims through people who had studied the scriptures of non-Muslims, the scriptures of Ahlul Kitab. So there were two main sources of these reports. One was Wahb ibn Munabbih, and the other was Ka'b al-Ahbar. Both were they were from Jewish origins. They were great rabbis, great scholars of their religions. They both came into Islam and they became scholars of Islam. They mastered the Quran, they mastered the prophetic teachings. Sometimes they used to narrate things that they had heard in the past while they were Jews, while they were rabbis, things that they used to read, things that they used to narrate. So sometimes they would share these things with the Muslims, that this is what we used to hear. Not necessarily to endorse or to establish them as correct, but rather just telling the people this is what those traditions have. Now these types of narrations fall under generally speaking, three categories. There are some which are also affirmed by Quran or Hadith. What those narrations are saying, Quran or Hadith, are saying the same thing. So those narrations we can take, there's no harm in it. There are some which are directly against what Quran and Hadith or the principles of Deen are saying. So if the Quran mentions an incident in a certain way and an Israeli riwayah narrates it in another way, we're obviously not going to accept that riwayah. Similarly, if those narrations bring up an incident or a matter or a concept that is in direct conflict with our beliefs, with our fundamental principles as Muslims, then also we will reject those narrations. So if that narration goes against the usul of our deen, for example, the isma of the Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam, the innocence of the Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam, if there is a narration that compromises the integrity and respect of a Nabi, we will never take it. But those people had no hesitation in passing these things on. Then there's a third type of narration that is neither affirmed by our religious texts, nor is it denied by our religious texts. It's a detail of an incident. It's a story regarding which there is no mention in our text and tradition. So we have specific teachings from Allah and His Rasul ﷺ in how to deal with each category of these. Regarding the first category, we can accept them, we can narrate them. The Prophet ﷺ says, as is in the hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari, وَحَدِّثُوا عَنْ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ وَلَا حَرَجٍ. Though this refers to those narrations. You can narrate them from Bani Israel. Regarding this last category that are neither confirmed nor denied, the Prophet ﷺ has said, لَا تُصَدِّقُوهُمْ وَلَا تُكَذِّبُوهُم. Don't say they have spoken the truth, and don't say they're lying either. And as far as all of the other things, well, there are clear texts in Quran and clear texts of Hadith that attributing something towards Allah which Allah has not said. وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنْ كَذَبَ عَلَى اللَّهِ. Who could be a greater liar than one who lies about Allah, who lies about the Prophet ﷺ or any Nabi of Allah? So those narrations we will reject. The reason why I'm bringing this discussion here at this juncture is because there are many reliable tafsirs that also have Israeli riwayat. For example, Tafsir Ibn Kathir. Ibn Kathir rahimahullah has mentioned numerous Israeli riwayat in his book, and the purpose of those is not necessarily to prove something. Sometimes he is bringing the riwayah to show how ridiculous the claims were that they made. And sometimes he's bringing a riwayah to show, look how close their narration is to what the Quran is saying. And sometimes he's bringing it in, perhaps just to bring in some extra detail that is not mentioned in Quran and not mentioned in Hadith. So the reader has to be wise enough, intelligent enough to navigate through these. Otherwise, if you take every narration as something that Ibn Kathir has mentioned in his tafsir and you think of it as a tafsir of the Quran, then you will reach some very incorrect conclusions. So وَمَا كَفَرَ Sulayman. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first of all exonerates and absolves Sulayman alayhi salam from any such thing, any such attribution. Sulayman did not commit any act of disbelief. The word kafara, as used in Quran and as used in Hadith, can refer to one of two things. One is leaving the realm of belief and going into disbelief, rejecting something that should be accepted. That is kufr. Then there is kafara in the sense of committing an act of kufr. Committing an act of kufr. And kufr in the Quran is also used in the meaning of being ungrateful. But in regards to kufr as disbelief, there's two usages. Here, it's the second meaning. Committing an act of kufr, because there's no question about Sulayman alayhi salam becoming a disbeliever. But sorcery and magic, as you will hear, these are acts of kufr and can in fact result in a person becoming a disbeliever, depending on what extent they practice it or they believe it. وَلَكِنَّ الشَّيَاطِينَ كَفَرُوا. The shayateen, those evil jinns that were coming and teaching this, and those that were coming and carrying out the acts for those magicians, these people committed acts of kufr. They were disbelievers. How can you bring Sulayman alayhi salam towards a thing that comes from shayateen? How could you have the audacity to do something like that? Such a great Nabi of Allah, you're saying that he did things that have been brought and implemented by shayateen? So what were they doing? يُعَلِّمُونَ النَّاسَ السِّحْرِ. Shayateen were the ones teaching people magic. Then, وَمَا أُنزِلَ عَلَى الْمَلَكَيْنِ بِبَابِلَ هَارُوتَ وَمَارُوتَ. And these people, they also followed. They also started chasing after and pursuing that which was revealed to the two angels sent to Babylon by the name of Harut and Marut. What was that? The Quran explains. When this magic and sorcery became prevalent in that society, Allah Azza wa Jal decided to clarify for people the difference between His Anbiya and these followers of shayateen. How could He do that when, if it was a Nabi that was coming and explaining the difference and showing the difference, people would say that means this Nabi also knows about magic. So how do we know? Maybe he's also a magician. So his words would have lost their effect, and instead people would have started accusing him that, well, you know it all, you understand it all, you explain it so well, so why wouldn't we think that you are also a magician? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala selected two angels for this. Two angels that were sent in human form. Harut and Marut. Now, again, in the Israeliyat, there are so many ridiculous narrations. There's a very scandalous story, in fact, that has been fabricated around these angels and how they fell into temptation and all kinds of things. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا يعصون الله ما أمرهم ويفعلون ما يؤمرون. They never disobey Allah. They never disobey the commands of Allah. They only do what they are commanded. So are we going to take the command of Allah, those clear verses of the Quran, or are we going to take some silly Israeli riwayah? So anyways, these two angels were given the task of explaining to people the difference. And what they would do is they would say, look, these are the principles upon which sihr, magic, is founded. And these are the principles based on which Allah sends revelation. This is how Anbiya alayhimus salam operate. This is how magicians operate. But before they explain this to anyone, they would give a disclaimer. وَمَا يُعَلِّمَانِ مِنْ أَحَدٍ حَتَّى يَقُولَا إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ فِتْنَةٌ فَلَا تَكْفُرْ. anyone who came to Harut and Marut for this information, for clarification, they would say, look, whatever we are going to teach you and tell you, it's going to be a big test for you. We have been sent as a test for mankind. Don't you fall into disbelief. It's kind of like what our teachers used to explain to us when, in the beginning years of our studies, we studied logic, mantiq. And while learning mantiq, which is basically, you can say it's a continuation of the philosophical formulas that were first introduced by Aristotle. So it's founded largely on Aristotelian logic. So those logical formulae, which were then taken by scientists and mathematicians and people from the Islamic tradition as well, and developed, people like Ibn Sina, people like Abu Nasr al-Farabi. So the purpose of learning mantiq is not that you try to understand the whole deen through this kind of logic, but rather the purpose is so you can understand the kinds of conclusions people form and how to answer them in a logical way. Because if you were to quote Quran and Hadith, they don't believe Quran and Hadith. They follow a certain stream of logic. So how to give them the answer in an equally logical way, in a way that makes sense to them. And to explain things to people who are not, whose iman in manqulat, whose iman in the religious text is weak. And also, as a side benefit, to sharpen the mind and sharpen the brain. So it helps in many areas in developing the thought processes. But the same kind of disclaimer and same types of warnings would be given to us. إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ فِتْنَةٌ فَلَا تَكْفُرْ. Look, this is a big test. This mantiq is a big test, because there are some people who read it and they actually start they allow their brain to become subservient to that line of thinking. So then they start following their logic. They want to understand everything in light of that logic, including the dhat and sifat of Allah. They want to understand the whole system of Islamic beliefs through that logic, and because they cannot, they end up going astray. So mantiq was taught for a specific reason, but it was taught with great care and great precautions. And many ulama in their various times, because of the path that people had walked down, they declared the learning and teaching of mantiq to be haram, because of what it does to certain people. So we had to be extremely careful. So Harut and Marut were giving a similar warning that, look, this is going to be a test. Don't you fall into this. Don't you allow yourself to be tempted by these teachings, so that now you start practicing them. فَيَتَعَلَّمُونَ مِنْهُمَا. But people went with the wrong intentions. So this was, in fact, a way of sifting people, sifting believers from disbelievers. That's why we should be very careful about what we are learning and who we are learning from. Sometimes there are branches of knowledge that seem very intriguing, very exciting. But the fact is that we always need to start from that knowledge which is foundational to our deen. That knowledge which forms the foundation, we need to secure that knowledge and then build up. There's some people, they're so intrigued by learning usul al-hadith. Somebody wants to learn usul al-tafsir. Somebody wants to learn usul al-fiqh. Somebody wants to learn this, that, and the other thing, but their foundation is not strong. To teach that person those things would in fact be an injustice. Khair. People went ahead and learned from them. فَيَتَعَلَّمُونَ مِنْهُمَا مَا يُفَرِّقُونَ بِهِ بَيْنَ الْمَرْءِ وَزَوْجِهِ. Just like people today go to all kinds of amils and they have a vendetta against someone, could be a family, could be a couple, okay, give me something that I can break these people up. So gives them some taweez, gives them something. Every other day, someone comes and says, I found this dead animal in front of my house. I found these writings in the corner of my house. I found such and such thing, wrapped up in a cloth. I'm very scared to tell. Every other day, someone is bringing something. So these people, instead of learning the lesson they were supposed to from Harut and Marut, which is that this is sihr. Sihr is based on kufr and a'mal of kufr. And Anbiya alayhi salatu wassalam are the most distant thing from that. Anbiya alayhi salatu wassalam are pure, their teachings are pure, their source is pure. Instead of learning and understanding this, they say, if we do this and this and this, maybe we can succeed in our little agendas. So what did they do? They learned things by which they could separate a man and his wife. وَمَا هُمْ بِضَارِّينَ بِهِ مِنْ أَحَدٍ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. Even though they could not cause harm through it to anyone unless Allah Azza wa Jal gave permission. وَيَتَعَلَّمُونَ مَا يَضُرُّهُمْ وَلَا يَنْفَعُهُم. They learned those things that were harmful to them and were not of benefit. Whatever they learned through this, it was of harm. It was dangerous. It caused damage. And they knew, these angels had explained to them, وَلَقَدْ عَلِمُوا لَمَنِ اشْتَرَاهُ مَا لَهُ فِي الْآخِرَةِ مِنْ خَلَاقٍ. Anyone who walks down this path, they had been told that anyone who acquires this, ishtarahu, purchases it. Why was it called a purchase? Because they're giving their time. They're basically selling themselves or selling their akhirah. You either take this or you take your akhirah. So many people sold their akhirah for this. They knew indeed that anyone who acquires this, there is no share for him in akhirah. وَلَبِئْسَ مَا شَرَوْا بِهِ أَنفُسَهُمْ لَوْ كَانُوا يَعْلَمُونَ. It was a terrible thing that they sold their souls for, if only they knew. So a quick summary of this concept of sihr. Now, if you were to look up the word magic in the dictionary, you would find all kinds of definitions. Magic is anything that is amazing. Anything that is amazing, that seems to defy the elements of nature, something that defies gravity, something that the eye cannot capture, something that is seemingly impossible. If somebody does it, it's considered magical. So, sleight of hand, people who do tricks with cards, for example, illusionists who make you see things, all of this could be included in magic. However, the definition of magic in Islam, that act which is condemned, it does not refer to these things. These things could be looked at as play, as entertainment, as a waste of time. It could be categorized under any of those things. But doing that is not, neither is it an act of kufr, nor is it kufr itself. Okay? The magic that is being addressed here, it is a very specific group of actions that people do. And these actions are based on a few fundamental things. If you will understand these things, you'll understand the whole thing. First of all, this type of sihr uses jinns. It uses evil and mischievous jinns. These jinns are those who have pledged their loyalty to Iblis. They are followers of Iblis. They're worshippers of Iblis. They only carry out his instructions. And they will only do something for someone who has also pledged their loyalty to Iblis. This is the first step. If somebody were to wish to become a sorcerer, that's the first thing they're going to have to do. So what do? They start reciting these kalimat, these words in which they openly announce their disbelief in Allah, and they openly pronounce their loyalty to shaitan. And they will say these words over and over and over and over again. The other thing they will do is because they want to attract shayateen. And you may already know that shayateen are attracted to impurities. Like Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam taught us about toilets in the Hadil Hushusha Muhtadara. That these toilets, these places where people go and relieve themselves, they are frequently occupied with shayateen. But when a person, before entering, reads the dua, says Bismillah, or says Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-khubuthi wal khaba'ith. So this becomes now a barrier between him and the eyes of those jinns. They can't see him, they can't harm him. Now, how do they attract these shayateen? Well, they keep themselves in various states of impurity. Just like malaika are attracted to purity. A person sleeps in a state of wudu, subhanallah. A person who sleeps in a state of wudu, Allah appoints an angel to spend the whole night with him, worshipping on his behalf, making dua for him. Malaika are attracted to tahara. Evil jinns are repelled by tahara. They are attracted by filth, by impurities. So these people keep themselves in a perpetual state of impurity. Not just that they don't make wudu or anything like that, but they keep themselves surrounded with and they keep themselves anointed with filth. All of those things that we would, if it were to touch our body or our clothing, we would immediately wash ourselves from it. They keep themselves immersed in all those filths. Whether it's blood or it's feces or it's urine, any kind of impurity, they will keep themselves immersed in it. So once they do that and they start reciting those things and they start pledging their loyalty to shaitan and his armies, then after some time, these evil shayateen start paying attention to this man or woman. They start noticing them. And then a time comes where they will come and they will say, what do you want? What is it that you want? And at that time, this person, because they have gone so far in that state, in that disbelief, even those shayateen are willing to cooperate. They're willing to cooperate. And some of them are able to capture these jinns. They capture the jinns and they make the jinns do all kinds of things for them. This is the gist of it. This is the sihr that is haram. It is an act of kufr. And if a person does it, if a person carries out this process of becoming a magician in this way, that person is without doubt a disbeliever. And its practice, to any extent, to any degree, is absolutely haram. And to associate oneself with those kinds of people or to go to them for assistance, this is an act of kufr. Somebody goes to someone like that and says, I have this problem, can you help me solve it? I have this enemy, can you help me deal with him? A person who does that has committed an act of kufr because they have basically sought assistance from the armies of Iblis, from the armies of Shaitan. Can magic actually harm? Allah says yes, it does cause harm. With the permission of Allah. In other words, if Allah wants someone to be saved, they can be saved. But magic, this type of magic, undoubtedly has an effect. It can have a severe effect on anyone. If there was someone who could be immune from it, it would be Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But our blessed Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam was also afflicted by these types of spells. I don't want to go into the details of the modalities of how it's done and what things are used. That is not required here for in the context of tafsir. But the point is that many things will be said and done and written and recited, all of which revolve around Iblis. Now, when you understand this and you understand that mu'jizat, those miraculous feats that occur through prophets ﷺ, those are acts of Allah. Those miracles are not the acts of prophets, they are the acts of Allah, and the prophet is the instrument, the tool that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses to bring that about. So when Musa alayhi salam struck the water with his staff and it split into 12 paths, that was not the power of Musa alayhi salam. That was Allah's command. Allah told him, you strike with your staff on the water. He did that by Allah's command and the water split. So mu'jizat are in fact acts of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah uses the Anbiya alayhi wasallam. The Prophets alayhi wasallam cannot carry out miracles at their own will. They cannot willingly carry out any miracle. At that time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it happen through that Nabi. That's why while recounting the miracles of Isa alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him that you did this, you used to do this, bi'idhni. You did this, bi'idhni. You did this, bi'idhni. All of this was by my command. Whether it was bringing the dead back to life, وَتُبْرِئُ الْأَكْمَهَ وَالْأَبْرَصَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. Those blind people, those lepers that you were curing, it was by the command of Allah. Whatever you did, it was by the command of Allah. It was not your doing. So that creates the balance between keeping the prophets from amongst the human beings, but also that connection that they have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that through which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes amazing tasks and feats from them. They remain human beings, the power remains with Allah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala employs them to carry out His command. If Allah wanted, He can do that without the means of a prophet as well. So these were a few points about this particular verse, and inshallah we will continue this. Verse 103 summarizes, وَلَوْ أَنَّهُمْ آمَنُوا وَاتَّقَوْا لَمَثُوبَةٌ مِّنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ خَيْرٌ لَوْ كَانُوا يَعْلَمُونَ. These people who were exposed to all those conditions, if they had simply done two things: stayed steadfast on their beliefs, آمَنُوا. Secondly, adopted taqwa, stayed away from those things that they know are going to displease Allah. لَمَثُوبَةٌ مِّنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ خَيْرٌ. The reward that comes from Allah would be so much better for them. لَوْ كَانُوا يَعْلَمُونَ. If only they knew. And this message is for people of today as well. Even today, there are people advertising themselves on TV, on the internet, in newspapers. There's a Baba who can cure all your sicknesses, solve all your problems. He can guarantee you a happily married life. He can grant you children. He can do this and this and this and this. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. These people are all phonies. Anyone, even if there was some close friend of Allah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him some karamat, trust me, you wouldn't find him on Facebook. You wouldn't find him, with an ad in various columns of various newspapers. So this is not our path. This is not the right way to go about things, and in the process so many beliefs are disturbed, and to be honest, so many people are left heartbroken. We have dealt with so many cases like this where people have actually gone and subscribed to a person like that, to their services, and spent their life savings trying to save their marriage for a good cause, for a good reason, not to hurt anyone, but just to save their own marriage that was falling apart. There's people who have spent tens of thousands of dollars after these phonies. And even non-Muslims have gone to so-called Muslim people who are promoting these services, only to be filled with so much pain and so much, of course, hatred. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us and protect our iman. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين.